I mean, my life has gotten so incredibly good that it doesn't matter. Like alcohol to me does not sound like a solution or fun anymore. So I do firmly believe that I want to make this clear that drinking was one of the escape routes that I used to try to run from my own self-hatred and just debilitating level of shame.
Welcome to Amy Liz Harrison's podcast, Eternally Amy, a mum of eight's journey from jail to joy, a Gen Xer who overcame her struggle with alcohol to become a best-selling author and mental health advocate. She shares stories of hope and offers ideas for others struggling with mental health challenges. One thing is for sure, you'll leave with something to chew on. And now, here's your host, Amy Liz Harrison.
Greetings, compadres. This is a biggie. It might be a two-parter. We'll see how it goes. And I want to warn you ahead of time. My husband is out of town and a kid could come in at any point, need something, or use the bathroom and flush the toilet 75 times. So all bets are off. Okay, you've been warned. All right, so today is a deep dive into the ADHD dungeon. So I want to say right off the bat, and I know you know this, but just to put it out there again, I'm not a doctor. I am a best-selling author. I am a certified life coach, blah, and I am a meditation teacher on Insight Timer, but I learn the things that I share from my doctors. And then I share with my doctors my life experiences and the symptoms of ADHD that I experience. And of course, I've been diagnosed at this present moment in time. And so we talk about ADHD and how it shows up in my life. And then what I do is I have them then confirm that, yes, whatever it is that I'm explaining is indeed indicative of ADHD. And what it's like to live with it is something that I know very well. And so know that I'm not on some just like jag of self-justification. So I wanted to clarify, this is just me sharing my experiences with the professionals in my life and their confirmations and thoughts on my experiences, and then any resources that they pass on to me, I pass on to you. Okay, so I do like to give some helpful suggestions. As a certified life coach, I do want to empower you to feel like you have some tools to use and try. So as always, I would encourage you to go to a psychiatrist or a therapist and get a professional, a mental health professional, to help you along your journey, because you may or may not have ADHD, but maybe some of this podcast will resonate with you, or maybe it's not you personally, but it's somebody you know and love, could be a friend or a family member. But really, we're all on pathways, right? We're on treadmills. We're going in similar directions at different paces, and we have different bodies. And so it's the same thing, just in different costumes, right? All journeys toward mental health and wellness, right, are all kind of in the same family, is what I'm trying to say. If we're willing to do the work and get diagnosed with whatever it is that we have. So in this episode, basically, I'm going to break down what it's like to live with ADHD. And I'm going to tell you why I'm so passionate about talking about this. And I'm going to tell you my approach personally to dealing with my ADHD and how I learned that ADHD presents differently in women or girls than it does for boys and men, and why, generally speaking, of course, the price, in my opinion, is far higher for undiagnosed women. Okay, so along the way, I'm going to throw in a bunch of life examples, and a lot of these I have not shared ever. I may have mentioned them once or twice to my husband along the way, but it's just to him sort of probably random ramblings of his wife that he never would sort of put all those pieces together. And I have the benefit of doing it now because I have a diagnosis. And as a healed person in recovery, this is what I do all day, every day, is talk about this stuff so that I can stay recovered and stay in the solution and in the health, right? And not in the problem. And I love talking to other people who are on that same journey. Not so much the ones who know that they need work and don't do it. Those people, I'm kind of just like, I'm going to love you from afar because I'm not here for that. I'm here for the people doing the dirty work because I'm doing this dirty work day in and day out. And that is what is beautiful. That's where you find beauty in the mess. All right. So, what is it like to live with ADHD? So, the example that I'm going to give you is one that I heard for the first time on the Mel Robbins podcast, and she got it from somebody else. And I can't remember who you know how these things go. This person said it, but they took it from somebody else and thought it was a good example. And now I'm taking it from Mel Robbins' podcast and using it as an example here. Okay, so she talked about that she had heard of this being an orchestra. So picture that your brain is like an orchestra warming up for a concert. Okay. And it's your prefrontal cortex, the one that you're always told is not fully formed until you're 25, and that's supposed to really help parents deal with teenagers, etc. Prefrontal cortex, in charge of decision making and all of that, right? So to picture that area like an orchestra warming up. Okay, so picture the sounds. People are opening up their like violin case, maybe like the strings are kind of sharpening their I don't know what they do, sharpen their bow. I guess maybe they tighten the strings. I don't know. Okay, but you hear all these different sounds, right? Lots of people running scales, maybe on a flute, maybe some percussion instruments. And so, in a normal or typical functioning non ADHD brain, when the conductor steps up onto the stage on his little platform or her little platform, right? And they pick up the wand and they tap it tink, 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 tink on the side of their music stand. And then they lift up the wand and they point to the string section, let's say, and they say strings. So that kind of means the rest of the orchestra is supposed to quiet down. And then the string instruments begin to play. You've got the cello, you've got the violin, you've got the viola, you've got the big old, I don't know if that big old bass, the kind like the kind that they use in like jazz festivals and like beat poets use it, the big old one. I'm assuming that's also considered a string instrument. What the hell do I know? Anyway, they begin their part. So in theory, all you should hear if you have a normal brain is the strings. Okay. But for the ADHD brain, or at least for me, when I don't take my medication or don't have the proper focusing methods, which I don't take medication all the time. I take it as needed. And I'm just here to tell you, I know that I'm probably going to get some comments because I'm in recovery. And here's the deal. I primarily take half doses anyway, and I don't take it on the weekend. And you know what else? I'm a big believer that I don't need to justify my mental health or medical diagnoses to anybody, just like I don't need to justify what I do in my recovery to anybody because I do a lot of shit for it. And so I'm going to loop back on that later when I talk about throwing the kitchen sink at your diagnoses. Okay. So if my brain is untreated that day, it is as if I can't hear those strings. I can't hear the guy on the big old bass. I can't hear just the strings. I still hear everybody because my conductor has not stepped up on the stage and has not picked up his or her wand and tapped tink, tink, tink on the side of his or her music stand. Nope. My conductor in my ADHD brain is basically out taking a smoke break in the back of the theater, right? He's checking his Facebook, whatever it is, but he is not present when I need him to be unless I have my medication. So it's basically the inmates running the asylum inside my brain. There's definitely a difference. And so it's not unmanageable unless I'm needing to focus on something. And if I'm needing to focus on something, it is impossible. So in other words, you are not able to compartmentalize and hush things. Okay. It's like having multiple tabs open on your computer. And you know how you can just sort of like bring one to the front when you need it. You can leave the others in the background. That's the scenario that I'm trying to describe, right? So the ADHD brain cannot really do that. So it's as if without medication, right? So it's as if we've got all the tabs open, but we cannot make one go full screen when we need it to go full screen. Does that make sense? So imagine living like that. And again, I'm going to loop back to this point also for most of your life, right? Till you're like 40, which was what I was around age 40 when I was diagnosed. So if you need to access that tab and make it full screen, you cannot. You just have to kind of sit there and listen for the strings while everybody else is slamming cases and playing their instruments too. Another example would be one of my sponsees currently works in a call center, and she was explaining to me what it is like to try and concentrate on your phone call with other people in the room who are also working on a phone call with a customer. And so everybody is talking at the same time. You may have had a similar experience, maybe if you're at a party or somewhere that's really loud and people are talking everywhere and you're having trouble focusing on the conversation. Same thing. But the phone thing to me just sounds like purgatory. I cannot even, you guys, like, you know, when people first got cell phones and they were like, well, if you're a Gen Xer, you remember this. People would be like, I'm talking on my cell phone. and they had what I used to call a cell phone voice, which was basically just super loud, super amplified voice, like, because it was hard to hear people over those initial cell phones, and you kind of did have to kind of at least speak up. And so I can't imagine playing like the volume fight, like basically karate chopping for airspace and volume in a call center. It just, I can't. She's amazing. I don't know how she does it. Another example, and this is like the last example I'll give under this point about what it is like to live with ADHD, untreated, right? And undiagnosed, which is really a, a whole thing, which we will unpack. But I just wanted to start with this so you could kind of get the picture of what it is that I'm talking about. So this last example is when I was in elementary school. There was a boy who sat across the room from me. And in our class, we would have these timed math tests. And so they were like for multiplication facts. And the teacher would start the stopwatch, and this child would stomp his feet very rapidly. Okay. And this entire panic would come over him. And he'd be like scratching his head, and he's stomping, and he's like pounding his fists, and he's like writing in between, but then he's like pounding his fists again. And it was like this whole like adrenaline thing happening. I didn't know what that was, then. I really didn't have a clue. I just thought he was weird, right? But I mean, literally all I could think about and concentrate on was him. Okay. So I could not focus on that quiz. If you paid me $1 million and put a gun to my head, no way, no how. And interestingly, as a result, I failed math and was sent to the special ed math class. And later I was diagnosed with different learning disabilities and math. And, my brain just would not focus on the paper in front of me because of that distraction on the other side of the room. I want you to pay attention to the fact that I just talked about that my reaction was internal. I just watched this whole thing like, oh my gosh, like I was watching a movie and I couldn't do my quiz. But for him across the room, it was a very outward display of ADHD, or what I'm going to assume was ADHD. Okay, just for the sake of this example. But I find it interesting that the outward fidgety, panicky, adrenaline reaction came from a boy. My internal reaction came from a girl. I'm just saying. So if my attention is being controlled by this prefrontal cortex being able to shush and quiet and suppress a channel, but it can't because my conductor is out on the smoke break, right? And all the instruments are playing at once. My brain goes bananas, right? So normal brains, just to kind of sum up, can bring that other tab up and make it a full screen. Or they can quiet the other instruments so that they can hear one section of the orchestra at a time. So normal brains can go into a focused state. And my brain did not work that way and does not work that way, unmedicated and without tools. So my brain was basically missing a conductor, right? And so what I understand from talking to my doctors is that the research shows that when you're not properly diagnosed with ADHD and you have it, the outcomes for girls in particular are pretty terrible. Put another pin in that one. So let's move on to why am I passionate about talking about this? Okay. My experiences as a woman with ADHD, diagnosed now and undiagnosed. So being diagnosed and being treated, and being undiagnosed and untreated are very different experiences. And I also get that with age comes a certain perspective and hindsight and wisdom that I wasn't going to have in elementary school, right? So that being said, I personally look back as I sit here now at age 47 and being diagnosed when I was in about 40, and I can look back at my experiences and I know for a fact that I would not have struggled with anxiety and depression the way that I did had I been properly diagnosed, treated, and medicated for ADHD when I was younger. Does that mean, oh, maybe you're not really an alcoholic, blah, 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 because this diagnosis came after I got sober? So the answer is I'm not sure. And I hope I never find out. Like, I hope I never chance losing my sobriety over a glass of Chardonnay, over like, well, maybe I wasn't an alcoholic. Let me just start drinking again and see. Because I mean, my life has gotten so incredibly good that it doesn't matter. Like, alcohol to me does not sound like a solution or fun anymore. So I do firmly believe that I want to make this clear that drinking was one of the escape routes that I used to try to run from my own self-hatred and just debilitating level of shame. And I'm also passionate about talking about this because I know for a fact there are a lot of you out there who are symptomatic of ADHD. And a lot of you now have kids who have been diagnosed and are neurodivergent learners, and ADHD often runs in families. And if you've ever met my dad, you would see that this is true. And yes, some of my children have also been diagnosed. So I want to peel back kind of a personal story. And so I'm going to have several of these on this particular episode. But I want to talk about a particular family member who was not diagnosed, who's in kind of the boomer generation, and is somebody that I have lacked a lot of empathy for. And I just basically put them in a "you're an asshole" box. And when I did that to that family member, I just kind of detached from them. And I read everything that they did through the lens of, you're just kind of a dick, just, you don't love me, you don't accept me. And then once I kind of got that in my head, I saw everything that that person did through that lens. And again, the boomer generation, they ain't out there seeing shrinks. Some are, right? Like, some are very woke and some are very in tune with their personal growth, but a lot of them aren't. And that's generational. It was access to shrinks, it was money, it was time, it was people's judgment, a myriad of things. But this particular family member went through some real shit, like some shit that I have not heard of before, all being combined into one person's life. And this person, this family member, I mean, I would bet donuts to dollars has ADHD and doesn't know it. I am not going to diagnose anybody else, but the symptoms are there. The outward symptoms are there anyway. And so what I'm saying is that by my own diagnosis at age 40-ish, I had all these random pieces floating around in outer space from my entire lifetime up until that point. And then those puzzle pieces began to fall together. And now, when I look at that family member, I have a deep sense of empathy for them and a very deep sense of love, because they have been through some effed up shit, like really bad. And instead of judging that person and how they operate in the world, I actually think that person is kind of a miracle. It is a miracle that person has made it to their 70s. And it is a miracle that that person has compensated and naturally made ways to get around their challenges of unhealed trauma and undiagnosed ADHD, amongst other things, you know? And so, excuse me, I have a real admiration for people who forge ahead. They don't have the knowledge that nowadays we have access to get diagnosed, right? And so I feel lucky. I feel lucky to have a diagnosis and to know what I'm dealing with, because that's a common theme that I talk about on this podcast, is when you know better, you do better. Hello. Hi. You know what, sweetie? I'm recording a podcast. Can you give me a few minutes?
Yeah, but
Can you give me, yeah, you can. Can you give me just a few minutes though, and I can like help you with all that? Okay. Okay. All right. So my approach to dealing with my ADHD and really my recovery, my health issues, all of this is, despite people who would like to criticize, which by the way, you just sort of can't. You sort of can't ever judge another person's situation because you really don't have all the facts. This is what I found for me, right? Is that the times where I have tried to judge other people, it bites me in the ass every time. Because when I find out more information, it's like, oh my gosh. And then I feel like terrible that I judged them in the first place. So it's been a process, but I have really learned, particularly through 12-step fellowship, no, girl, you never have enough information to judge anybody else's situation. Anyway, that being said, I throw the kitchen sink at it. So for my 12-step recovery, it's like, I still go to a meeting almost every day, at least one. I still meet with my sponsor. I still sponsor people. I still do all the things because that's what I know works. What I know works is to look at my own behavior and own it, make amends when necessary, right? Drop people out of my life when necessary, and really not just do that on a whim, but really try to make amends for situations. And sometimes they can't get past it, or they have their own issues and their own just crap, unhealed stuff, right? And so those people, I have to kind of just set you aside, not dump you on your ass, but just kind of like, oh, yeah, no, not right now, maybe someday, but they have work to do. But I continue to be in the work. So I continue to throw the kitchen sink at it. And that's what I do with my ADHD, right? So I do medication. I meet regularly with my 2 psychiatrists. Those 2 psychiatrists, my ADHD doctor, know what is going on with me at all times, and they know about each other, right? And of course, they have my prescription records, so they know what I'm taking. And we talk through all of these things, right? They help me to reframe. They, we do CBT, all the basics, the RET. And, then I've got my 12-step program that I'm active in. And that's a lot of the same stuff, And speaking of kitchen sink with that, right? I mean, when I first got out of rehab almost 13 years ago, that's what I did was I threw myself into different classes operated by local rehabs here at home, right? I did relapse prevention. I had group therapy. I was in big book studies. I mean, you name it, I did it. My drug of choice was alcohol, but I imagine I would have taken Suboxone if that would have helped me out. Or in, whatever, I don't even know what all the brands are nowadays, but whatever the opioid receptor blockers are, I would have probably taken those. Anything that helps or could potentially help along the process to getting sober or getting healthier, like I'm in it, right? I'm here for it. Knowing that for me, the mental health portion is the chief importance of levels. Like it's like the top level for me is the mental health. If I don't have that, I don't have the rest of it. That is for sure. And so I treat that with such kid gloves. I'm going to give you an example. This is about throwing the kitchen sink at a diagnosis. So, you ever meet somebody who has a very rare form of cancer? And I have not personally experienced this, but when I had myocarditis and I was down to a 7% ejection fraction, which my heart failure doctor tells me is not conducive with actual life and living, you come face to face with your mortality. Not that you couldn't walk out of the door and get hit by a bus today, but it's a very sobering experience. And I've heard the same about getting a very rare cancer diagnosis, right? And you hear of people doing, Fresca, radical things. So, maybe their certain form of cancer has a very low success rate of being healed or cured. And, they could only dream of being in remission someday. So they go to different countries and they see different healers and they use Western medicine. And then, someone told them about some magical waterfall with a, pool with these healing waters in it. And so they go and they try that. It's like, I would do the same shit. I would do the same thing because I'm going to throw the kitchen sink at it. Everything that I can, I'm going to throw at it if I want to get well. Right. And so that is how I approached my ADHD and really all other forms of health in my life these days. And another example I like to give is turning on the lights, man. It is easier to solve the problems and come up with the solutions when you actually know what the problem is, right? If you're looking for your keys and you're in a dark room, it really helps to turn on the frickin' light. You know what I'm saying? But when we don't have a diagnosis and we sort of bury our heads in the sand, which is what I did before I got sober. I'm sorry I keep intertwining recovery and ADHD, but it's just, two different sides of a similar coin, if that makes sense. or they're intertwined, right? They're adjacent. Okay. So when we don't have a diagnosis, we're living our life sort of in darkness in a sense. And we're doing the best that we can with the tools that we have, either to try and, crawl around on the floor and find the keys, try and prevent some of these diseases as they come up. But we don't know what we don't know until we have that diagnosis and we have evidence. And we can't find the keys until we find that light switch and we turn it on, right? So to me, a diagnosis is evidence. I mean, I know the practice of medicine is a practice, right? But to me, it's pretty scientific, particularly if you've got, lab results. And, then at that point, I've got a foundation. I've got a starting place. I can make a plan. I can try different tools. I can explore different options and ideas. I can use medication. So all of these different things are like spokes off of the hub of a wheel. And the hub of the wheel is the diagnosis. And, I'm going to throw whatever I can at that diagnosis. So I may have like 50 spokes sticking off of it. And that is okay, because pretty soon I'm going to find something that works for me or works well with me, that I feel at peace with, right? And I may or may not be fully healed, if you want to use that sort of permanent word, but I'm going to find something that I can live with, that my higher power has really helped solidify in my spirit is something right for me. And I'll tell you, one of the key things that you learn, just on the piggybacking on the whole cancer diagnosis and what I told you about my heart, things come into focus real quick when you have a health crisis. Okay. And you realize when the chips are down, really all you have, right, is other people and your health. You have your family, you have your health. And when you don't have your health, or you may not have your health or your life, right? It's the connections and the love with these other human beings that really get into focus quickly when we're faced with our own mortality. So I share all that because ADHD, in my experience, is a lot more than, hey, let's get some Adderall. Let's stay up all night and watch all of the Police Academy movies while we crochet like 75 scarves to give to unhoused people, right? This is a very serious issue, particularly for women, because we're so profoundly underdiagnosed still. And, for decades, it was like that for me, that I lived without even knowing what this was. And so we're going to talk about the mental health implications that come with all of this, and particularly for women. And so I just want to be clear that the spokes off of the ADHD hub are so many different kinds of tools. And there isn't a set that's like a one size fits all. Hello. Okay. All right. They're taking a shower. Oh my gosh. It's great without even being begged. So medication is a spoke. Things like the Pomodoro method is a spoke. Things like journaling in a very specific way, which I plan to do another episode on later. That's another spoke. There are all these spokes to treat ADHD. And we won't get into any of those on this particular episode, but that's kind of like a to unpack later kind of thing. And so I am going to put a stop to this episode, because where I'm at now is I'm going to talk about how girls and women with ADHD present symptoms differently from boys and men, and what that looks like. And keep in mind what I told you about my friend from elementary school who was across from me during the timed math tests. And I've kind of set this whole stage up for discussing all of that and then giving you some very personal examples from my own life that I have not shared. And so that will be next time. I didn't really realize that I've already been talking on this podcast for like almost 50 minutes. And so come back for part 2. Please remember to be kind, rewind, and I want to thank you for the honor of your time. Take what you like from here and leave the rest behind.
Thank you so much for listening to Eternally Amy, a mum of eight's journey from jail to joy. Amy Liz Harrison is a best-selling author, speaker, 12-step coach, meditation teacher, and recovery advocate. To find out more, please visit amylizharrison.com. You can keep up with Amy on all platforms by following @AmyLizHarrison. Please subscribe and review this podcast. It means so much to us if you do.